Welcome back to another Halloween Wednesday, but this time on a Thursday, because, well, we tried uploading this video yesterday, and, the video didn't turn out great, so we decided to, redo that, but it was getting late, so we decided to switch that to today. I know. Anyway, I am your host, Grim Harvest, and today we are looking back again at I Rewrote Jeff the Killer by YouTuber Pastra. This time, we're on Chapter 7, Lou Woods. And we're going to be continuing from Chapter 7 all the way to the final chapter. Well, this one's just long. Anyway, let's begin.
Lou Woods woke from another restless sleep to the sound of knocking at his door. He didn't know what time it was, but could tell from the sunlight attempting to peek through his curtains that he was awake too early. He slowly sat up in his mattress, trying his hardest to keep himself awake as he listened intently. The knocking continued, with 3 more heavy slams coming to his door. Lou scrambled off of the mattress he kept on the floor, trampling over several empty wrappers and bottles that had amassed around it. To keep his balance, he leaned against the rickety wooden door of his closet before standing up straight. He reached under his yellow, stained pillow and pulled...
I'm sorry. Yellow stained pillow. Lou, were you peeing on your bed? Were you peeing on your pillow, Lou? What in the world? Also, did Pastor say something about wrappers and bottles? Lou, please clean up your room.
Pulled out a small switchblade he'd kept under it for safekeeping. He stared at the knife for a moment, clutching it so tightly he could feel his hand trembling. He came for me during the day, he thought to himself, playing out every single possibility of what would happen the moment he opened the door. He stayed like that for a while, only breaking from the trance when the sounds of the door knocking outside returned quickly and loudly. Struggling to get to his feet, Lou slowly crept across his dingy apartment with the knife behind his back. As he arrived at the door, he put his back to it and gazed out the peephole, only to see 2 officers standing outside. The officer who appeared to be the one knocking was an older man. His face was square and rugged, with large bags drooping beneath his eyes and a poorly maintained mustache across his top lip, littered with gray hairs that showed his age. The officer next to him looked like a child by comparison. He was thin and clean-shaven, his large blue eyes showing a youthful enthusiasm that his older partner lacked. He had longer black hair which looked to be slicked back. When Lou got a good look at the officers, he let out a long sigh of relief, putting the knife on his kitchen island and speaking to them from the other side of the door. "Hello? Who's out there?" he said in a weak, scared voice. There was a pause outside, with the 2 officers being heard saying something to each other quietly. Lou couldn't quite make out what they were discussing before the older man spoke up.
"We're here with the CLPD. We're here to ask you a few questions about your brother,"
the officer said in a stern voice. The mention of his brother filled Lou with dread. He caught himself shaking again and began taking long, deep breaths in 4-second intervals to try and calm himself down. Eventually, he built up the courage to reply. You finally found him?" Lou asked, barely able to hide his own excitement at the possibility that the nightmare he was living through would be over. There was a long pause outside again, with the officers being heard speaking amongst themselves once more before the younger man spoke up.
"No, we haven't found him. That's actually why we're here. We were hoping you could help us,"
he replied. Lou was now confused. He thought he told the police everything they needed to know a few years back about his brother. Why were they back now? What could they possibly need to know? The question sent his mind racing, fixating on every tiny detail that could be missing until one of the voices from outside interrupted his mental spiral.
"Are you still there?"
the older man said, starting to sound concerned. Lou snapped out of it and pulled the door open a small crack, showing himself to the officers. The moment the door opened, he could see the sudden looks of shock that were displayed across their faces. The officer's eyes went wide, and Lou swore he saw the younger one's jaw drop at the sight of him. It was the first time anyone had seen him in a while. Lou rarely left home, and in those countless hours he spent lying around, waiting for his brother's return, he barely took care of himself. His long brown hair was matted and greasy. His eyes drooped down with deep purple bags hanging low beneath them from the countless nights spent awake, and he wore the same green t-shirt for countless nights on end.
Goodness, Lou, I know you're scared, but it doesn't mean you have to stop taking care of yourself, you know that?
Not even mustering the mental strength needed to change. It was no wonder the two officers looked so shocked. The older cop was the first of the two to actually speak up, with his younger partner still trying to find the words. He simply asked for the two of them to come inside, to which Lou agreed, opening the door completely. Their shocked reactions to Lou's appearance extended to that of his home, which with the lights on looked nothing like a proper living space. The apartment was practically empty, with barely any furniture in sight aside from a worn-out, used couch that looked like a hand-me-down of a hand-me-down. The floor was covered in all sorts of garbage and unwashed laundry, all of which the two officers made an effort not to step over in a strange attempt to be courteous. Lou turned over to them, awkwardly grabbing onto his left arm and saying, "Sorry about the mess," in an almost sarcastic tone before taking a seat on his couch. The entire couch let out a loud, creaking sound, as if the sudden weight put onto it would cause the entire thing to shatter. The two officers looked around for any kind of chair they could seat themselves with, and upon noticing that the couch was their only option, chose to continue standing as they spoke to Lou. The older officer spoke.
Because, let's be honest, sitting on the same couch as, someone else that you're interrogating, that's kind of rude, isn't it?
First, properly introducing himself.
Lou Woods. My name is Samuel Morgan. This here is my partner, Norman Keller.
The younger one, Norman, gave a small, sad wave as his name was mentioned.
We're sorry to disturb, whatever it is you have going on here, but we're hoping to ask you a few questions about your brother.
Lou looked up at Samuel and asked him, "I thought I already told you guys everything years ago. You promised me you'd find him, and then you told me time and time again that you were still looking. What more could you possibly have to ask?" As Lou asked the question, he saw the two officers shoot each other concerned glances before Norman spoke up.
You, haven't been keeping up with the news at all, have you?
Norman asked, scratching at the back of his head and avoiding eye contact. Lou looked confused between the two officers. He had no idea what they were trying to imply. He'd spent months isolating himself, only ever leaving his home when it was absolutely necessary. The fear of being followed was too great. In that time, he barely kept up with anything, viewing it all as a distraction that could let his guard down. "What are you talking about?" he asked, feeling the shaking sensation flush over his entire body once more. "What's happened?" There was another pause where the officers looked at each other as if quietly deciding who would break the news before Samuel continued.
There's been a string of murders that have taken place over the last month, Lou. All men who have similar descriptions to yourself. My partner and I have a strong suspicion that the culprit is your brother.
Okay, so Jeff is looking for Lou. He's looking for people that look like Lou. I thought that he was just I thought that Jeff was killing people, believing that they were Lou because, he's just lost it. But no, if you have the slightest, I mean the slightest resemblance to Lou, you're dead.
Jeffrey Woods.
Anxiety flooded through Lou's body at the mere mention of his name. His legs curled into his chest, and he began violently hyperventilating there on the couch. The two officers walked forward, trying their hardest to calm Lou down, but at that moment, he couldn't even hear them. Their voices turned to white noise, and Lou's vision became blurred. "Jeff is back. People are dying. It's all my fault. Why? Why did I have to survive? If I just died that night, then none of this would have..." Lou's thoughts were interrupted as Samuel grabbed him by the shoulders, bringing him back to his senses.
Thank you.
He said in a surprisingly soft, concerned voice.
You're going to be okay. We'll protect you. If this killer is your brother, we promise we'll...
Samuel tried to continue to reassure Lou, but was cut off. How did you find them? Lou asked, staring down at the ground as he spoke. The victims. How were they killed?
They were all killed in the middle of the night.
Norman said.
Most found with their throats slashed. We spoke to a couple of witnesses. All of them claimed our guy was a pale man in a white dirty sweater with a big smile.
Lou turned his gaze to Norman before responding in a near whisper. It's him. Samuel tried to continue the discussion, with Lou's simple response now piquing his interest even further.
That description matches your brother? Are you sure?
I'm sure. Lou doubled down, turning his gaze back to Samuel, his eyes now wide and piercing. Samuel took his hands off Lou's shoulders and took a step back, now seating himself on the cleanest spot of the floor he could find. He leaned forward, trying to make sure that Lou paid very close attention to what he said next.
Now listen, and listen well. If your brother really is our culprit, the only way we're going to catch him is if we know what he wants. We need to know everything you can tell us, Lou. Don't spare a single detail.
Samuel explained. The room went quiet after that, with the two officers now waiting for Lou's reply. Lou deliberated for a while over the request. The last time he trusted the police to find Jeff, the case went cold for years. He spent all that time living in constant fear that someday his brother would come back, fear he was forced to live in because they couldn't help him. But today could be different. If Jeff is still out there for a fact, if he is actively hurting people, this could have been his opportunity to finally see an end to it. If he just trusted these two officers, he could finally begin to feel like his old self again.
Yeah.
Fine, he finally said, making his decision. But there was a condition, something Lou needed the officers to follow through with no matter what. Make me a promise. Norman was the first to step forward, replying before his partner could even consider the request.
Anything. Whatever you want. We'll make it happen so long as you tell us what we need to know.
Promise me you'll kill him. The words that came out of Lou's mouth sounded hollow and empty. Not an ounce of emotion or compassion could be felt. The two officers didn't know how to respond at first, merely sitting in the tense silence that came from the request. It was Samuel who spoke up this time, giving Lou exactly what he asked for.
We promise.
He said hesitantly. Norman looked down to him with a questioning stare. It was clear the two didn't see eye to eye, but so long as Lou was given a promise from one of them, he didn't care. Okay then. I'll tell you everything.
Chapter 8. The Woods Family Homicide.
Life was hard for Jeff and I after the fire. In a single night, it took everything from us. Our home, our belongings, our father. When the house went ablaze,
I'll be honest, in the old creepypasta, it talked about that Jeff killed his entire family. Meaning he, killed his father. So, this is something.
was the first to act, escorting all of us out of there before the flames completely consumed the building. But Jeff didn't come out with us. A piece of debris had landed on him, crushing his left leg and trapping him inside. If it wasn't for our father running in to save him, we would have lost Jeff that night. He had just enough time to lift the wooden plank that crushed Jeff before the entire house came down on him. Jeff survived barely, but he was never the same after. His entire body was covered in third-degree burns, especially his face. Months of reconstructive surgery barely did enough to get him to look like his old self. His entire face was covered in scar tissue, with the nerves around his mouth being so severely damaged that he could barely even open it. His left eye had gone completely blind, having this milky white appearance to it, and what was left of his hair hung to his scalp in long black patches. It took a while for us to figure out what our next step was. Our mother, Margaret, barely made enough to make ends meet, and Jeff was just starting college while I was finishing up high school. We couldn't afford a home like the one we had before, at least not on our own. We ended up moving to Carpenter's Landing as a solution to that problem. Our Aunt Marcy owned a plot of land here and offered to give it to us in light of everything that happened. She thought it was the least she could do after losing her brother, you know. We weren't picky about the offer either. After all, beggars can't be choosers, and despite everything we heard about this place, we thought it would be a fresh start for us. A chance to get away from the lives we had before, a chance to move on.
Oh, how wrong you were. How wrong you were.
Our very first day in Carpenter's Landing, we got a good look at the new place we'd be living in, a small, run-down bungalow that hadn't been lived in for years. By the time we stepped foot in there, the paint was peeling off the walls and it looked like some druggies used it as a crack den. Burnt cigarette butts and broken glass littered the floor, and some of the windows had to be boarded up. Only reason we were there to see it in that state was because our mom wanted to help Aunt Marcy clean the place up before we moved in. Since they didn't want us getting in the way, and Mom wasn't comfortable having her 2 teenage sons spend the whole day cleaning up used drugs and broken glass, she gave us some spending money and let us explore the whole town. I remember being super excited about the whole thing. After everything we'd gone through, it felt wonderful just to get out and explore somewhere new. Jeff, on the other hand, was very apprehensive about the whole thing. Ever since his accident, he was scared to go out in public, especially somewhere that no one knew him. He became much more reserved, often wearing this large white sweater with the hood up at all times to hide his face. I assured him that things would be okay, and he tagged along with me despite his worries. We spent that whole day riding around town on our shitty little bikes, taking in all the scenery we could. Every gray building, every dingy alley, every run-down gas station. We didn't care where we were going, anywhere was good enough. At the end of the day, we stopped our sightseeing tour at this small convenience store downtown. I wanted to get some snacks for later that night, and Jeff tagged along, waiting for me at the back of the store where nobody could see him. That was when we had our first run-in with this guy named Randy and his 2 buddies, Troy and Keith. Randy was the textbook definition of a generic bully. Guy dressed in this black leather jacket with ripped jeans and what looked like some kind of death metal shirt underneath.
Let me guess here. Let me guess. That guy owns a motorcycle. He definitely swears at his parents. He wears fingerless gloves. Oh, and he picked up some bimbo he met at the bar. That's true? Oh my gosh.
His long brown hair was slicked back with gel and his ears were covered in all kinds of piercings.
Oh, so you're a greaser. But hey, it doesn't change anything I said.
The 2 guys with him, Troy and Keith, had a similar vibe. Troy was a bigger guy who wore a large red sweater and had this short stubble all over his face. Keith was a shorter, scrawnier kid. He wore large, baggy clothes and had a rough buzz cut that nearly went down to his scalp.
And you're the bully, Keith? I'm sorry, but it sounds like you need to be bullied.
When we met these guys, they were causing a ruckus in the store. Apparently, the cashier caught one of them trying to sneak out a pack of cigarettes, and Randy didn't take well to being told off. After they were done arguing, Randy eventually found it in himself to pay the $10 that was owed, and he and his guys stormed out of the store. When I went up to pay, I was told that apparently that kind of thing was the usual for Randy and his gang. They were a bunch of troublemakers that were well known in town, bullying whoever they could and causing problems wherever they went. Apparently, Randy always got away with it because his dad was an officer at the time. I paid the cashier a little bit extra for the trouble, and as I was getting ready to walk out with Jeff, I noticed out the store's window that the 3 of them had decided to hang around outside to smoke. I asked Jeff to put his hood up and avoid being seen by them, and he agreed. If these guys were as bad as I was told, there was no way in hell I was about to let them see my brother and validate all his fears about leaving the house. Fate would have a different plan for us, though, because as soon as we left the store, Randy in particular took notice of us. He called out to us, bringing attention to his 2 lackeys that followed him around.
Hey, don't think I've seen you 2 around here before.
He
Okay. I'm going to say this. Whoever voiced Randy, you were a school bully when you were growing up. I'm sorry. Look, you voiced Randy so good. You voiced Randy perfectly, though. But that's probably because you were a school bully. Okay, that was a joke. Please do not take this seriously.
He said, flicking his cigarette butt to the ground and stamping it out before approaching us. I remember I tried to be the one to hold a conversation with Randy, all the while Jeff nervously stood by our bikes facing away from him. I tried to be polite, introducing myself and Jeff to Randy, but he was the kind of guy who didn't care about that. To him, we were just fresh meat to be picked on, and he particularly took an interest with Jeff.
Why the hell won't your brother look at me when I'm talking to him? Doesn't he got any manners?
Randy asked,
Were you even talking to him, or were you talking to Lou?
walking towards us with his hands in his pockets, all the while Troy and Keith laughed at us from behind him. During the whole conversation, I would shoot these occasional glances over at Jeff to see how he was doing. He was shaking, staring at the ground with this wide-eyed, empty stare like a deer in the headlights. In his left hand was this lighter he carried around from back when he was smoking, one of his only possessions that survived the house fire. He would occasionally pull it out when he was stressed or nervous, fidgeting with the cap of it. That's what he was doing when Randy grabbed a hold of his shoulder and turned him around, making him face him by force. The three bullies all took turns giving their own shocked, disgusted reactions to Jeff's appearance. Randy in particular had the strongest reaction of them all, stepping back in momentary horror which quickly devolved into mocking laughter.
Man, no wonder you couldn't look at me. What the fuck happened to you, man?
Randy sounded amused as he asked the question, with Keith and Troy rudely laughing behind him as if to follow suit.
Also, sheesh. How long have you been on this right now?
Before anyone could continue, I spoke for Jeff, desperate to defend my brother from the situation that was now unfolding.
I can't see anything.
There was a fire. Our old place, it burnt down. We were lucky that Jeff made it out alive. I yelled in defiance, tears welling up in my eyes.
Lucky?
Randy rebutted.
That's what lucky looks like to you?
He pointed at Jeff, who now appeared to be boiling with rage. He clenched his open hand into a tight fist, and I saw his eyes go bloodshot.
If I were you, I would have much preferred that fire take me out instead of make me look like some kind of...
Before Randy could even finish his insult, Jeff swung at him, hitting him cleanly across the face with a hefty punch. Randy...
Oh, take that, Randy. Heck, that's what you get anyway. What kind of name is Randy? Oh, take that. And I was imagining that in my head, too. That was crazy.
Randy reeled back, and I immediately ran for Jeff, grabbing at his shoulders and trying to pull him back. The whole thing turned into chaos after that, with the three guys jumping on Jeff and I, leading to this massive brawl right outside the convenience store parking lot. The whole thing got broken up when I noticed the cashier calling the cops from inside the store. I yelled that to the rest of the guys, and before I knew it, Randy and his lackeys were out of there in an instant. Fortunately, Jeff and I weren't badly hurt by the whole thing, with only a few minor cuts and bruises being left
Dang. They must suck at fighting.
where we were hit. When we got back to the new house that night, our mom was of course concerned about the whole thing, but we just made up some lie about getting into an accident with our bikes instead of telling her what really happened. Our mom tended to worry a lot after the fire, and we didn't want her to stress too much about our new life here on our first day. A month passed after that, and while our new house was properly renovated to allow us to live there decently comfortably, things did not get much easier for Jeff. He told me that Randy and his gang were relentless, especially after he started his college semester with them. They were harassing Jeff at practically every opportunity they got, with it getting so bad that one night Jeff went as far as to show me several knife wounds he had supposedly gotten from them attacking him off campus. He wouldn't let me tell anyone about the bullying. He told me that it would only make Mom want to get the police involved, and with the connections Randy had, it would only make things worse. So I kept quiet about the whole thing, no matter how much it pained me to see my brother suffering like he did. With all that in mind, I really should have seen the warning signs when Randy went missing only a month into our semester. I remember it clear as day. His face was plastered on every telephone pole in town. News broadcasts were talking about it everywhere, and it was the talk of my school for weeks. If I knew then what I know now, I like to think I would have suspected Jeff right away. But back then, I just couldn't fathom the possibility of it. After we lost our dad, Jeff was the only person left in my life that I had felt like I was really close to. We still had our mom, yeah, but her and I were never particularly close by comparison. That, and I just didn't really have any reason to believe Jeff did it, you know? Sure, Randy and his guys bullied him, but Randy was also involved in some bad crowds of people. You can come up with any number of stories about what happened to him, and people would probably have bought it at the time. So yeah, despite my mild suspicions of something being wrong, I buried those feelings and convinced myself it had to be someone else's doing. Same could not be said, however, for Troy and Keith, who only seemed to get worse after Randy's death. I remember those two continued to go after Jeff long after, with the bullying going from cruel mockery to that of vengeful harassment. Jeff told me they practically chased him down the halls of his school, calling him a murderer and yelling things like, "We know what you did, Woods," at any opportunity they got. The harassment got so bad that Jeff started to completely isolate himself, missing countless days of classes and terrifying our mother. She tried to talk to him about it, but he was completely unresponsive, leading to her asking me to try and get through to him. I went to his room one night when our mom had already gone to sleep and pushed his door open just a crack to see.
First off, Lou, can I tell you this? Maybe the better option for Jeff here is to get him some therapy. Yeah, maybe that's what you should have done. Heck, in my book, I'd probably have suggested that after that fire, that all of you get some therapy here. It might seem to be the only way for all of you to cope with what just happened.
See if he was still awake. Before I even saw him, I noticed the state that his room was in. It looked terrible. Cardboard boxes from our move were still scattered about, their contents all over the floor in large, messy piles. Clothing, school supplies, old posters and figurines, everything cluttered the room like it had been thrown around violently. And then I noticed the smell. The entire room smelt foul, like burnt cigarettes and something else I couldn't identify. The smell and sight of the room were so vile that I nearly missed Jeff himself, who I finally noticed at the foot of his bed, facing away from the door. In the dark, I didn't know what he was doing at first, until I saw the brief flickering of his lighter burning the end of a cigarette. He would light the cigarette, staring at it for a short time like he was in some kind of trance, and then instead of smoking it like I expected, he would roll up the sleeve of his white sweater and put it out on his own arm.
Oh, no, Jeff. Jeffrey Woods. Just why? You see, Lou, this is why you need to get your brother some help. I mean, he is hurting himself now. So, please, there's probably a therapy unit somewhere next door. Go over there now.
I was so shocked by what I was watching that I just stood there in silence, mouth agape. And that was when I heard him mumble something under his breath. Something that made my heart sink to my stomach. He said in his raspy, strained voice,
"Why was Dad the only one who had to die?"
The words didn't sound.
What, did you want to die too? Jeff, I know a lot of bad things is happening right now, but it doesn't mean you need to give up on yourself like that. Lou, please take your brother to therapy. He needs it.
Sound right coming out of his mouth.
Eesh.
They were empty. No, they were angry. He sounded livid as he continued to light those cigarettes, bringing them to his arm and leaving a new, disgusting burn scar where they were put out. I couldn't bear to watch or listen anymore, so I flung the door open. "Jeff, how could you say that?" I exclaimed. I didn't even realize until...
Hold on for a minute. They're playing the song, Sweet Dreams Are Made of Screams. That's Jeff the Killer's theme song.
While I'd entered the room, the tears were streaming down my face. I must have looked like a mess. Jeff quickly turned to look at me, this look of horror plastered across his face once he realized that I had heard him.
"Lou, it's not what..."
He tried quickly to explain himself to me, but I wouldn't let him. "Do you know how much you mean to me? To Mom? How could you go and say things like that about yourself, Jeff?" I
Yeah.
need you here more than I've ever needed anyone. Living here, I have never felt so alone, so isolated from everyone else. It was never the same without Dad, and you're the one thing keeping me sane right now. I could barely keep myself together as the words flooded out of my mouth. I could see the terror on Jeff's face slowly fade to a calmer expression as I explained myself to him. For a little bit, there was a tense silence between us as he carefully chose what to say next. I remember what he said to me clear as day.
I'm sorry, Lou. It's just been hard. You and Mom. I know you both lost Dad too, but you haven't had to deal with things like I have. You
He is right.
haven't had to deal with being bullied every single day. You haven't been accused of murder, and you don't have to wake up every morning and see someone completely different staring back at you in the mirror. I'm sorry.
He avoided eye contact with me as he spoke, keeping his eyes trained on his lighter. He was fidgeting with it again. I could tell what he said to me was something he had been bottling up for quite some time, and having to say it to me at all must have been stressful. I figured a change of scenery would help. He was cooped up in his room for multiple days on end, and I figured some fresh air would help him. Do you remember when we used to sneak out at night back in middle school? I asked him, changing the tone.
You used to sneak out in middle school? How many middle schoolers do that, and why?
Tone of our conversation drastically. He looked up at me in shock, tilting his head as he responded.
Yeah?
He responded, humoring me. Well, Mom is asleep right now, and you and I are still up. If you're thinking what I'm thinking, I continued, making
Raise your hand if you believe that this is going to be a bad idea. Y'all can't see it, but I'm raising my hand.
my way to the door and gesturing to it with my hands. Jeff stared at me like I was a moron, eventually rolling his eyes and getting out of bed. He knew I wasn't going to take no for an answer, and I felt like he was also just playing along so I wouldn't continue worrying about him through the night. Regardless of why he agreed, Jeff and I snuck out that night and went around town on our bikes, making a point of sightseeing and traveling to places we'd never seen before. I remember the rest of that night like it was yesterday. The bright city lights all around us, illuminating the streets like they were our own little suns. The massive buildings turned dark, towering silhouettes. And that cold night breeze that blew past us as we rode through the streets as fast as we wanted. If the night had ended right then and there, I feel like things could have been perfect. That was one of the few moments where it really felt like Jeff and I had properly bonded as brothers again. But of course, no good thing lasts forever, and our night very quickly took a turn for the worst as we realized we were being followed. We stopped a couple streets from our house after making some laps around our neighborhood. I remember
What? I'm not going to lie, I was probably about to pause in order to, observe. I was going to pause in order to observe this guy's artwork and guys, this guy looks a bit scary. But I paused at the wrong moment, because what is this? What is this?
we'd stopped right by a stop sign on an intersection, with there being a light drizzle that signaled for us to start making our way back. Right as we were getting ready to leave, though, a familiar pair of voices yelled out to us. I quickly turned to look behind us, seeing Troy and Keith approaching. I almost didn't recognize them at first. They looked so different from when we encountered them at the gas station. They both looked like they hadn't slept in days, with Keith's outfit looking filthy and Troy's stubble having become a complete, poorly kept beard.
Hey!
Troy shouted at us.
What are you doing out here so late, Woods? Are you looking for more victims?
When Troy spoke, there was this growl to his voice. He sounded pissed, beyond pissed. He and Keith continued to approach, with Jeff and I not knowing how to respond or what to do. That was when we saw Troy reach into his pocket and pull out a small switchblade he'd kept hidden there. The moment Jeff and I saw him unveil the blade, we tried to ride off on our bikes, but the two guys were close enough that they were able to catch up and pull us off. There was a struggle between us, but it quickly stopped the moment I saw that Troy had the knife to Jeff's throat. I fell to my knees with Keith still firmly wrapping his arm around my throat, and
Look, Keith is like a tiny baby, right? I'm sure you can wrestle this guy.
I began to panic. Please don't hurt him. He didn't do anything to you, I pleaded, terrified of what Troy was planning. My begging only seemed to make him angrier as he pulled Jeff in closer to him. Jeff struggled for a moment, kicking his feet and grabbing at Troy's arm, which held him in place, but quickly stopped once the blade made contact with his neck.
Didn't do anything. Is that what he told you?
Troy said, staring at me with eyes that looked more like a wild animal's than a man's. He then turned his attention towards Jeff.
Why don't you tell your little brother, Jeff? Why don't you tell him what you did? Huh?
Jeff never looked at Troy, instead continuing to stare at me the entire time, even as he spoke.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Jeff responded,
Jeff didn't
which
do
only made
anything.
Troy bring the knife closer.
Right?
Now the faintest bit of blood could be seen running down Jeff's neck as the knife broke skin. Jeff had no reaction.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Now that? Yeah. That's the bullshit. If you're not gonna tell him, Jeff, then I'm going to.
Troy shouted, now pointing the knife at me.
Your older brother never told you what he got up to at night, did he? Well, Randy sure told us. You know, before he died, Randy went to Keith and I and told us that this freak right here was stalking him.
I'm not gonna lie. Whoever is voicing Troy, massive respect to you. Massive respect to you. I'm not gonna lie, you kind of make him sound a bit insane, but still.
Said he caught him off the corner of his eye, following outside the school. He was scared, man. We had never seen Randy scared. You know, he even told us a couple nights before he died that he saw your brother right here, standing outside his house. What a coincidence, right?
I didn't know what to make of what they were telling me. They sounded insane. Here they were in the middle of the night, probably stalking us, pointing a knife at my brother and accusing him of killing Randy. I couldn't believe it. No, I refused to believe it. Troy continued, though, and as he did, I could see panic setting into Jeff's eyes.
Now, we didn't believe him at the time. We thought he was just messing around with us, you know? But then a couple days later, he goes missing. And we have no idea where he could have gone. If we just listened to him, maybe he'd still be here. If we just listened, then this freak could be behind bars right now. And Randy would still be fucking alive. But we didn't.
Can you stop? You're making me think that you're crying while you're going insane at the same time.
do that. We did. And now, we gotta try to make up for it.
As he said that, Troy pointed the knife at Jeff once more, who began kicking his feet and struggling again. He looked terrified.
Okay, it's true.
Jeff shouted at a volume I didn't even think possible.
I
Also, I could hear dogs barking in the background.
killed him. I killed Randy. But I wasn't stalking him. It was self-defense, Lou. He attacked me in an alleyway when I was trying to get home. He pulled a knife on me and tried to kill me.
Who do you guys believe? Do you guys believe Jeff? Or do you believe Troy? Honestly, I wouldn't believe any of them and just run away.
I only got away because I wrestled it out of his hands and stabbed him with it.
I had never heard Jeff speak that way before, even before the accident. His voice was shrill and shaken, his eyes large and dilated.
Self-defense my ass.
Keith chimed in.
If it was self-defense, then why did you run? Why didn't they find Randy, huh?
Because I was scared. I knew Randy's dad was an officer.
Yeah,
I didn't think anyone would believe me, so I hid the body and I ran away.
Jeff blurted out, keeping his eyes trained on me. Despite the fact that Troy was the one threatening his life, the entire time it felt more like Jeff was trying to convince me of his innocence than anyone else out there that night. I just sat there in silence.
Do you believe him?
I didn't know what to do or what to think anymore. Troy answered for me, though, the look of fury never leaving his face.
You can say whatever you want, you godless fucking freak, but I will never, ever believe you.
He said.
Oh,
His
God.
voice sounded calmer than before, almost a whisper, but the rage never left it. I didn't know what he was planning on doing to Jeff, but I never got to find out as police sirens could be heard quickly approaching. Turns out one of our neighbors saw what was going on from inside her house, and she decided to call the police before anyone could get hurt. An officer quickly arrived on scene and broke up the entire thing before Troy and Keith could do anything. Everything after that passed by in a blur. Troy and Keith were arrested right then and there, and the entire time they were escorted to the car, they were kicking and screaming all kinds of insults and profanity at us. Once they were taken care of, an officer stuck by to ask some questions to Jeff and I about what happened. He asked why the two of them attacked us, and Jeff froze up completely. I could see the fear written all over his expression. He probably thought I was going to tell the officer what the other two had told me, but truth be told, I believed him. Maybe it was my naivety or the desperation in his voice when he confessed to me, but I really, truly believe that if my brother had killed Randy, it was for a good reason. So I lied to the officer. I told him nothing about Jeff's confession, about the truth of Randy's disappearance. That night was the first night in months where I felt like I had my brother back and I was not about to lose him because of some massive misunderstanding. I told the officer a half-truth, explaining that Troy and Keith were friends with Randy and that they blamed my brother for the disappearances. When he pressed further, all I said was that they used to bully Jeff and convince themselves it was his fault when Randy disappeared. The officer seemed to like my answers. He nodded along as I explained things, paying close attention to the words I chose, and eventually he seemed satisfied. He let us off with a warning about going out at night and asked if he could come back in the morning to ask us some additional questions about the two bullies. Once I agreed, the officer simply tipped his hat to us and we were let go. I thought it was a miracle, the two of us being sent home like that after I told such a massive lie. But I think Jeff saw things differently. Maybe it was the demeanor of the officer, perhaps his own paranoia, but Jeff was convinced that the officer was onto us, that the additional questions he wanted to ask in the morning had nothing to do with the bullies, but rather Jeff's involvement in Randy's disappearance. The ride home after that felt like I was walking on eggshells. I didn't dare speak to Jeff. He was unusually quiet, even for himself, and the entire time we rode our bikes, he simply stared ahead. He never looked at me, nor do I even think he was looking at the road. He just...
Remember when I said you should have taken Jeff to therapy, Lou? Yeah, maybe you should have.
stared into nothing. When we arrived at home, he stormed inside with no regard for our sleeping mother, who may have been startled awake by him. I was worried. I'd never seen my brother like that, so I followed him as he made his way towards his room. What followed next was the single most horrifying moment of my entire life. He slammed open the door to his room, made his way inside, and began what I could only describe as an adult temper tantrum. He grabbed a hold of whatever he could get his hands on and began violently throwing them around his room, thrashing about in a near feral rage. I don't think he was even aware of me being there to see it. He just continued doing so until he got a hold of one box in particular, which he violently threw against the wall. The contents of the box spilled out on the floor, revealing more clothing and school supplies which were haphazardly stored in it. Among this pile of random, innocuous items, however, I heard something that instantly drew my attention to the floor and made Jeff completely stop in his place. The sound of metal rattling against the wooden floor.
Lighter fluid?
I looked down and saw that buried underneath the clothing and supplies which were stored inside that box was a small switchblade, which looked...
Oh. You all are probably like, so you're not concerned that he has a switchblade or something? Look, I was thinking he had lighter fluid on him, and I was thinking to myself, so Jeff burned the house down. Yeah.
To be covered in dried, crusty blood. My mind began to race at the sight of it. I had no idea why my brother would have kept Randy's knife in our house, so poorly hidden underneath all his untouched clothing and supplies. Jeff, why would you keep Randy's knife? I asked, and I turned my gaze from the knife to him, desperate for an answer. What I saw staring back at me was someone completely different from my brother. He stood in the center of the room, completely frozen in place, with a hollow, soulless stare I had never seen from my brother. No, from a person before. His
Yeah, Lou, this is why you should have never took Jeff out tonight. You should have just left him there.
eyes were opened unnaturally wide, almost looking as if something was forcing them to stay open. He didn't blink, and the pupil of his right eye was so dilated that it almost made his entire eye look black. That stare told me more than any words ever could. It told me that in this moment of weakness, that Jeff had shown me something I never wanted to see, and the thought of that brought me a greater terror than anything else. I began to question him further, desperate for an answer, desperate for anything he could say to put my panicked mind to rest. Jeff, why did you keep this knife? He continued to stare. Jeff! This was Randy's knife, right? He continued to stare. Jeff. I was so overwhelmed I could barely get the words out. Jeff, those cuts on your body. Randy didn't give them to you, did he?
Lou?
He continued to stare.
Get out of there.
At that point, I didn't even know who it was I was talking to anymore. I turned a blind eye to my suspicions for so long, but right there in the middle of that dark room was someone I didn't even recognize as my brother anymore. For a brief moment, while I stood there in complete shock and terror, I could see his demeanor change to that of something inhuman. He hunched forward and looked as though he was going to advance towards me before our mother's tired voice could be heard from behind me.
Boys, what's wrong?
She asked.
This is your mother? I'm sorry, but she sounds way too young to be your mother. This sounds like a sister or something. There's no way this is your mom.
He asked. It was clear from the way she was rubbing her eyes and the way she spoke that we had just woken her up from her sleep. Jeff never once looked away from me, not even reacting to the sound of our mother's voice. He just continued moving towards me like some kind of animal, taking large, exaggerated footsteps. I ran out of Jeff's room and tried to usher our mom out of the house before I could even explain what was going on. I didn't know what was wrong with Jeff, but there was no way I was going to spend the night in that house after what I saw. Our mother, however, stopped me dead in my tracks and demanded an explanation about what was wrong. I couldn't offer much. I was in such a panicked state that I trampled over my own words. All I managed to muster up was, "Something is wrong with Jeff," before I noticed him standing in the darkness of the hallway behind us. He held the switchblade in his hand and remained motionless, waiting for what our mom or I would do next. When our mom saw him, she didn't recognize the danger her and I were in. She tried to reason with him.
What's wrong with this woman?
Jeff, honey, what's wrong? Why are you holding that knife?
She asked. I remember from the way she spoke, she sounded more concerned than afraid. I don't think she ever imagined her own son could do anything to harm her, so in that moment, despite how it looked, she didn't see any danger to herself. Jeff never responded. He simply remained frozen in place. Our mother continued trying to get through to him.
Guys, I am more focused on this story that I just completely ignored the horrifying creature right in front of my face. What is that? It looks like a mixture of a skeleton and a ghost. What the heck is this? What is that? It's sans if he was dead, because of this.
Him. I tried stopping her, but she refused to listen to my warnings. She didn't see what I saw. She didn't know what I knew. All she knew was that something was wrong with her son, and despite everything, she wanted nothing more than to help him. And so she marched forward into what would become her own demise. The moment she took a step forward, reaching for Jeff, he suddenly sprang into action at a speed I never thought possible for someone like him. He quickly wrestled her to the ground, overpowering her completely. Once she was down, Jeff knelt down on top of her, holding the switchblade over his head with both hands. She pleaded with him in her last moment, yelling things like, "Why are you doing this?" and "What could I have done, Jeff?" But her questions fell on deaf ears. Before she was even able to finish her thought, Jeff plunged the switchblade deep into the side of her throat. Thick, dark blood ran down the blade, pooling on the floor beneath her and slowly creeping towards me. I stood there in stunned horror. What I saw in front of me didn't feel real. Earlier that night was the happiest I'd been in months. It felt like I'd finally had my brother back, and the two of us could be the carefree kids we were back before our lives fell apart. And now, on that same night, I saw the man I considered my brother knelt down, knife in hand, waiting for his own mother to drown in her own blood. The worst part of it all, too, is that he didn't even have the decency to look at her while he did it.
That's because she wasn't his victim. You were.
The entire time, our mother laid there, pleading to see even a semblance of the person Jeff was to her. He was looking at me. He stared at me with that same empty, soulless look I saw only moments prior, as if to tell me that somehow, by some twisted logic, what I was watching unfold before me was my fault.
I'm sorry, but it probably is. I'm sorry, Lou, but it probably is your fault. I mean, you had every chance to take Jeff to a therapist, and for some reason you didn't do it. You're the main one who was close to this guy. You could have done something. Also, for some reason, you had a good idea to take him out. Yeah, it's nice. Had a good idea to sneak out of the house. Maybe that explains why this happened. Eesh. I know you didn't expect this to happen, but still.
When the life finally left our mother's eyes and the gurgling and coughing came to a stop, Jeff clumsily attempted to pull the knife from her throat. He was met with a surprising amount of resistance. He had lodged it so far in there that it took multiple strong tugs to pull it out, so much so that when he finally did, it caused him to stumble backwards for a moment. Then he began advancing towards me once more. He moved in the same alien way I saw in his bedroom. He slowly inched his way towards me, taking long, exaggerated steps, only stopping briefly when I would show any sudden movements. I was so shocked by what I had just seen that my legs turned to jelly and I crumbled to the floor. As I pathetically attempted to crawl away from Jeff, I desperately tried to say something, anything that would make him explain to me why he was doing this.
There's pretty much nothing to say. Now go and run.
The only thing I could muster was the word, "why?" which I choked out between my tears.
Yeah,
It was enough to make him stop, as if the very question offended him. He then said something that changed everything for me.
Why?
He replied sarcastically, his eyes twitching.
Because you ruined everything, Lou.
He knelt down next to me as he spoke, blocking the exit to the house with his body.
You just had to survive that night, didn't you? You just had to smell the fire. You just had to...
Jeff started the fire. Jeff started the fire. Jeff started the fire. Oh, no. Oh. Jeff burnt the house down.
to wake Mom and Dad. All those months of planning ruined.
Something was wrong with this kid. Something was wrong with this guy. Something's wrong with him.
It would have been perfect, Lou. We all could have died together, but no.
Why do you
You
want to
and Mom
die?
survived, and I was stuck like this.
It was then that I understood the true depths of what my brother was. As I sat mere feet away from my own mother's corpse, Jeff crouched over top of me. It finally dawned on me why this was all happening. I'd spent so long trying to pin a reason on it, to find what the inciting incident was, the moment that bent my brother's life out of shape. But there never was one. It wasn't the bullies. It wasn't our dad. It wasn't the fire. It was Jeff.
It was Jeff.
It was always Jeff. I was living with a monster wearing human skin for my whole life, and only when it was too late did I finally realize it. He continued his depraved rant as if he'd rehearsed it for months on end.
Do you know what it's like to spend
Okay, first off, before Jeff continues talking, imagine if this was somewhere in your closet, in an alleyway, anything. Sheesh, I probably would have had nightmares tonight.
every single day trapped in a shell of your own body, being babied by the people you couldn't kill? Do you understand how humiliating that is?
Okay,
It's
Jeff,
like
look,
the
I
real
won't
you's
baby
a
you
god
no
up
more.
there, mocking me for my failure. Well, I didn't plan on failing this time. I spent months thinking about that night, what I could have done differently, how much it hurt. Reliving that pain, even in the smallest of ways, helped me figure it out, though. It was going to be perfect, Lou, but you
What do you mean,
ruined it
perfect?
again. You just had to keep babying me. You just had to be such a shitty liar.
You just had to be such a crappy liar.
You made me do this. You made me act early and sloppily. That's okay, though. This is still going to be the happiest day of my life. Oh, if I could smile right now, Lou, I'd be grinning ear to ear.
After he finished his rant, he stood again and wrapped his arms around himself in pure ecstasy, rocking back and forth. Over and over again, he said to himself,
If only I could smile. If only I could smile.
Jeff,
before he
stop.
suddenly stopped. A
Stop.
look of realization
Don't make me feel sick
plastered
right
all
now,
over his
Jeff.
face. He glanced down at the knife in his hand, our mother's fresh blood still trickling off of it. Then he glanced back at me before saying,
Oh, I can smile.
Jeff,
that was when he took the knife to his own face, and I was forced to watch him crudely carve a disgusting smile of blood across it. He was clumsy with the knife, tugging across each of his cheeks like a child carving a pumpkin. There were moments where he'd stop, gagging and coughing on his own blood, but he continued.
For some reason, when Pastra's doing this compared to the creepypasta, compared to the original creepypasta, when Pastra's doing this, he is making it sound more disgusting. I mean, dang, he's making it sound more grotesque. Compared to the original creepypasta where it just says that my dude just starts carving his face.
Regardless, until a vile, painful smile stretched across his face, ear to ear. The sight of such a horrific act of self-mutilation was enough for me to break free from the shocked trance I was in. I sprinted in the opposite direction of Jeff, towards the hall where our bedrooms were. Jeff gave me a head start, distracted by the euphoria of his new face, and I took that opportunity to run into his room. Jeff's room was the first one you would see when you entered the hallway, and I believed that if I had hid there, I could find something, anything, to defend myself with. I flung the door open, nearly trampled over all the miscellaneous items strewn about on the floor, and made my way into his closet to hide. At that point, I could hear him beginning to walk around the house again, calling out my name in a voice that barely sounded like him. I began to frantically look around the dark closet, pushing aside whatever clothing or boxes were in my way. That was when I noticed the smell again. That same stench I smelt earlier that night when I'd walked into Jeff's room. I thought it was just the smell of the cigarettes before, but inside the closet, it was so much stronger. I pushed aside more unclean laundry, hoping to discover the origin of the smell, when I found it buried deep within a corner of the closet. Multiple small cans of gasoline, which were neatly hidden away. Around them were several boxes of matches, as well as some burnt out cigarette butts. The sight and smell of them were enough to make me gag, a sound that I feared revealed my hiding place to Jeff. I needed to be quick, to find something, anything that I could use to fight back once he found me. I kept searching until I got my hands on his old backpack, opening it and looking through whatever supplies he kept in there. I found old notebooks, unopened packs of cigarettes, and what ended up catching my attention would look to be a box cutter.
Hold on, why do you have a box cutter in the backpack? You know what, never mind. Don't even answer that question.
I took the box cutter out, opening it and turning to the closet door to wait for Jeff's arrival. What I was greeted with, however, was something from my worst nightmares. Jeff was already there, standing at the entrance to the closet. The door opened just enough that I could see one of his bloodshot eyes peering in at me from the darkness.
How did you know where I was? How did you know where I was?
When I saw him, I let out a shrill scream, and he began laughing to himself as he flung the door open and attempted to pin me to the ground right then and there. I struggled against him, swinging the box cutter wildly before he overpowered me, holding down my arm with his right hand and dancing the switchblade against my face with his left. I remember how I was screaming and crying in that moment, all the while the man trying to kill me attempted to soothe me like a mother would their own child.
What?
He got right up close to me, the blood from his fresh wounds dripping onto my face, causing me to gag, and said something to me that I still hear in the back of my mind every night.
Go to sleep?
Shh. It'll be all right, Lou. When you next wake up, we're gonna see Mom and Dad again. Just go to sleep.
He then raised the switchblade over his head like he did before when he killed our mother. But right before he could swing down to finish me, I kicked him off of me with all the strength I could muster, and I stabbed him in the side of the throat with the box cutter. As soon as I'd done that, I made a mad dash for the door to our home, running out into the woods and screaming for someone to help me. I never bothered to check if Jeff was alive or still following me. I just ran and ran until my legs gave way and one of our neighbors found me. The police were called soon after. They went to our old home to investigate it and found no signs of Jeff anywhere. I was told they would find him, that he would be brought to justice, but 2 years have passed and Jeff was never caught. I've spent those 2 years living in constant fear that he will return and find me. I've begun sleeping during the day. I don't talk to anybody. I sleep with a knife beneath my pillow. It seemed like all you officers moved on from finding my brother, but I never could. And now you come to my doorstep, telling me that he could be back and he's killing people that look just like me. Now we're all suffering because he wasn't caught. When Lou finished the story, the entire room fell dreadfully quiet. The two officers clearly didn't know what to say, simply taking in all the details and trying to process them. Samuel was the first to speak, making what Lou saw as a weak attempt at reassurance.
Lou, I'm sorry we never found your brother. I promise you, though, no matter what, that we will find him. You won't have to live like this anymore. You won't have to be afraid of him coming back. Soon, all of this will be over.
The two officers stood up after that, asking Lou if he had anything else to tell them. He simply shook his head, and not long after, they made their way out. Lou wanted to believe what Samuel had to say. It was clear the man cared, but after 2 years of Jeff having never been found, he didn't want to get his hopes up. Once the two men were gone from his house, the tiredness hit Lou all at once. He was woken after only 2 hours of sleep, and he had no intentions of waiting until nightfall to get his rest. He made his way back to his room, peeking around the dark corners of his apartment one last time before opening the door to his bedroom and stepping back inside. He lied down on his old, yellowed mattress, tossing and turning as he tried his hardest to force himself back to sleep, but try as he might, he just couldn't do it. Something just didn't feel right. After 20 minutes of failed attempts to force himself to sleep, Lou finally sat up in his bed and surveyed his room. He knew something was wrong, but he just couldn't pinpoint it.
Jeff's in your room. Yeah, Jeff is in your room.
Scanned his surroundings, obsessively looking for anything that could be out of place, and that was when he noticed it. The detail that he was subconsciously aware of, but didn't take direct note of until that very moment. A mild draft that lightly pushed against his curtains. Lou always kept his windows closed.
Dang,
He tried to
there's no
shuffle
way
out
I'd
of bed,
open them.
immediately digging around under his pillow to grab his switchblade, only to realize he'd left it in the kitchen when the officers had visited. He ran over to the window, slamming it closed when he heard something behind him. The slow, high-pitched sound of a door creaking. Lou turned to see the origin of the sound and was met with his worst fear come true. There,
Yeah.
peering through the small crack left by the opening of his closet door, was an eye. A bloodshot eye that stared at him from the darkness. A voice muttered in a hushed, perverted whisper,
You found me.
Jeff. Chapter 9. Jeff the Killer. While his theme song is playing in the background.
Jeff waited impatiently inside of his brother's closet. He could hear the officers pestering Lou with question after question, completely unaware that the man they were looking for was a mere room away from them. They had led Jeff to his brother's apartment. They had no idea that he was still there at the scene of his last crime. The corpse of his latest victim was still fresh, another fake Lou to add to the pile. Jeff knew if he'd followed the officers, they could bring him to the real one with time. He was well aware of his own notoriety and used it to his advantage. He laid in wait,
congratulations,
watching
you're
from the
smart.
darkness as the two officers speculated over his murders. Apparently, the fake Lous that got away started talking, and with that, they would give the officers the lead they needed. To some, this would seem like a setback, but to Jeff, this was his perfect opportunity. Those fake Lous would lead Jeff right to the real one, and they didn't even realize it. When he'd arrived at the apartment complex, Jeff could barely contain his own excitement. There, standing before him inside his own concrete coffin, was the brother he'd been searching for. After 2 painful years of hiding in the darkness, planning his next move, finally it would all come to an end. Jeff made quick work, climbing in through the window to the real Lou's bedroom. He was lucky the officers arrived when they did. It gave him the distraction he needed to slink inside. He made his way into his brother's closet with ease and simply waited for the moment the officers would leave. As he listened through the walls intently, Jeff could hear his brother's account of the night he failed once again to accomplish his life's work. The very thought of it drove him mad. Jeff began fidgeting with his lighter once more, the images of beautiful burning flames dancing through his mind as he attempted to calm himself. What he would give right here, right now, to see this entire building up in flames, but he couldn't afford something so grand. Not this time. Lou had evaded him twice now, and Jeff's obsession with completing what he started began to eat away at him. Those fake Lous didn't help either. They popped.
Okay, you know what's kind of funny is that this guy actually addresses all those victims, all of these guys, as fake Lous. Like he's actually in the perspective of Jeff right now. That's cool.
Popped up around every corner, fake Lou after fake Lou, purposely put there to throw Jeff off his brother's trail. How selfish could he be to sacrifice so many people just so he could live a little longer? He fidgeted with the lighter more and gritted his teeth at the thought. How selfish, he repeated.
I'm sorry, but that's not being selfish. That's called survival of the fittest. Okay, actually, it's just called being lucky. But still.
Over and over in his mind. The thoughts nearly consumed him completely until he was snapped out of it by what sounded like the officers finally taking their leave. Jeff could hear the door shut behind them, and soon enough, his brother stumbled into the room and laid in bed. Finally, Jeff thought. His life's work was now mere feet away from him, and Lou didn't even realize it. The excitement felt like a raging fire within Jeff's chest. His palms sweat, his heart pounded, his eyes burned as tears of joy formed around them. But he had to contain himself. He had to wait. Wait until Lou had fallen asleep. But that moment never came. Jeff watched for what felt like hours as his brother tossed and turned in bed, and then he watched as he slowly sat up, glancing around the room as if something was off. Jeff was confused. What could possibly have tipped his brother off? He was completely silent and fought off his urges to show himself right then and there for the sake of subtlety. What could it have possibly been? Jeff deliberated over this question until Lou, unbeknownst to himself, answered it for him. The window. Jeff was so eager to get into the house that he never closed the window. This was an oversight he'd made before, his own eagerness often being his worst enemy. How could he have done this now? How could he have made such a simple mistake when he was so close to perfection? As his brother rose from bed to close the window, Jeff could see him looking around for something that seemingly wasn't there. A weapon? Did his brother bring a weapon? A sharp pain suddenly jolted through the side of Jeff's throat, memories from that night forcing their way back into his mind. The rage began to boil in the deepest pit of his stomach once more. He could barely control it this time, opening the closet door but a crack as his brother went to close the window. The door let out a small, shrill creak, and Jeff saw Lou freeze up. His cover was blown. No matter how hard he tried to recover from this, now was his time to act. He could see Lou slowly turn to meet his gaze, and for the first time in 2 years, Jeff could see the terror in the real Lou's face again.
You found me,
he said, barely able to contain his own excitement. This was it. The moment where everything would come to an end. The moment he'd waited so long for. Jeff slowly crept out of the closet to meet his brother face to face, and without a moment of hesitation, he saw Lou fling the door open to his bedroom and run out. Jeff gave chase, giving his brother a head start before pursuing
Holy freak, Pastor, you sound way too excited for this. Calm down.
him into the kitchen where he saw him standing over the island. Jeff turned him around and a struggle broke out between the two. Lou put up a good fight, but Jeff was always stronger, and soon enough he had his brother pinned down in a similar manner to when they'd last seen each other 2 years ago. Jeff laughed to himself as Lou attempted in vain to shove his brother off of him. He pulled out the box cutter that Lou had stabbed him with all that time ago and raised it over his head, ready to finally end this once and for all. But something distracted him before he could swing down. The light glint of metal in Lou's hand. A knife? When did he get his hands on that knife? In a panic, Jeff tried to finish the job, swinging down at his brother's throat, all the while Lou attempted to stab his brother with the switchblade he had concealed. When the blades connected with flesh, there was a long, drawn-out silence. That day, only one of the two brothers walked away alive.
Honestly, I believe Jeff is the one that made it because, let's be honest here, Lou stands no chance. Also, there are several Jeff creepypastas made. Some even gave Jeff powers like resurrection or telepathy. So Jeff is pretty much immortal at this point. So, yeah, pretty much Lou is dead. Wow, everyone! Pastress Jeff the Killer, created by Zachary Gnack. Great job, Zachary. Great job. Because I honestly really like that. Shout out to the cast. You guys did great. This is great. Special thanks to my community. Your support has brought my dreams to become a reality. Oh, that's nice. I mean, I have no idea why your dreams would be turning creepypastas into your own story, but hey, everyone has weird dreams from time to time. Well, everyone, that's Dream of an Insomniac.
He let out this small, childish giggle snacks as he enjoyed.
Wait, what? What did you just say?
he let out this small, childish giggle snacks as if he enjoyed.
Childish giggle snacks. Huh? Oh, what does that mean? Childish giggle snacks? Explain. Also, the story is now available on Tumblr in text form. Okay, so if you guys want to read his story, then just go to this. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this story of Jeff the Killer. Please go subscribe to Pastra for making this. Subscribe to Pastra. He made this, and I hope he makes a lot of other scary Jeff the Killer like horror stories. I hope he makes more scary like creepypasta horror stories. That would've been really cool. Anyway, I'll see you guys next time, and remember, Happy Halloween Wednesday.